Hey everybody, welcome to the Binge the Bible podcast. My name is Drew Dolan and it is the honor of my life to be here at Hope City Church bringing you this podcast today. We're really excited. We are talking today about the Bible, Binge the Bible podcast, and it is the extended version.
Yeah.
And this is where we cover all the things that time didn't allow us on Sunday. And in this podcast, we'll do a little bit of a deep dive and we'll talk about characters, content, context, and have conversations about sometimes the craziest things that happen throughout the scripture. And you know, if you've been here the last 3 weeks, there's some crazy things that happen. I'm joined by my amazing guests and co-hosts at this time. And you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves?
For sure, man. Yeah, I'm Trevor King. I serve in the Waterloo and Cedar Falls campus on the worship teams. Me and my wife have been going to the church for about 7-8 years strong.
Yeah.
Welcoming a baby boy this October.
Let's go. Come on.
Yeah, man. We're just excited to dive deeper into God's Word. And Binge the Bible series and podcast has been a blessing to our family, our lives, and to so many people. So I can't wait to dive in, man. Let's do it.
Yeah. My name's Daniel Liu. I serve as the worship director here at Hope City Church, overseeing worship and also production, events, and marketing and stuff like that as well. So it is an honor for me to serve in that way here at Hope City, and just to be on this podcast, talking about Book of Numbers.
Book of Numbers.
Yeah, Book of Numbers.
It was a great message this week, Pastor Drew.
Thank you.
Great job. Super insightful. But there's so much in there.
Oh, yeah.
There's a ton that we couldn't cover.
Yeah.
There's a ton that we couldn't. And I'm sure by now you've noticed that our pastor, Pastor Q, is not here. So we got the honor of leading this together as a group. Man. So there probably won't be as many nerd out moments as Pastor Q would say. But we're definitely going to do our best to bring you some really good content.
Yeah.
So talked through the Book of Numbers on Sunday and kind of just give a brief recap. We talked about Genesis is really the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
The beginning of the Bible. In fact, the word Genesis means beginnings.
Yeah.
And so the very first book, there's a ton of stuff to learn from it. And then we kind of jumped into the book of Exodus. And Exodus is really them escaping captivity, right? Mm-hmm. This is the children of Israel are leaving Egypt. And then we go into Leviticus, and God is setting up laws. He set up laws for holiness, really is what it is. He wants them to be able to dwell with him. So when we find ourselves in the book of Numbers, God he's done all these amazing things. He wants to collect a census.
Yeah.
He starts out with the first census of the children of Israel, and I kind of said it on Sunday. But really, I think the reason he set up the census was because he understood, and this is God we're talking about, so he knows way more than us.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
There's probably way more behind it. But in my mind, the mindset is he knows that the strength of a nation relies on the strength of its families.
Yeah.
The strength of a nation relies on the strength of its families. And so we're going to see throughout this talk today kind of that kind of pattern where God is trying to strengthen this nation. Mm-hmm. He's trying to make them a strong people. Mm-hmm. And you guys heard my silly story about Iris and just kind of all the things with that. But really, our households, our nations that we're creating in our lives, they are strengthened by the Lord.
Yeah,
they're strengthened by the Lord.
For sure.
And so I love that God starts us off. He says, hey, let's count the people, and then let's get them ready for the promised land. What were some things, I guess, for you guys that kind of stuck out that we talked about on Sunday? I'm looking at, right off the bat, God takes a census. You had talked a little bit about this before.
Yeah.
And, we'd love to hear some insight.
Yeah, I mean, just for me, as I'm reading it, I'm just kind of like struck and a little bit like amazed by the specificity of the numbers and just that it's like an exact count and for me when I see that it gives me like so much more like faith and credibility in the Bible because it's not just this like it was like I don't know however many there's 50,000 100,000 it's not just this like guess but to me it shows that like the book was written. It was written on purpose. There's specifics that go with it. It's like a history book and not just a good fiction novel.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think one thing about the Bible, especially the first 5 books of the Bible, is that it's written with historical, with a historical narrative, with historical context. It's not just a story. Like these are actual humans that lived on this earth that took an account of what happened, what they saw, what God told them, what was going on in this region. Like these are real people, and I think that helps you relate kind of more. The Bible, it helps you relate to the Bible way more when you understand these people really lived.
Yes.
I mean, now, even still now today, they're finding artifacts, they're finding out different things over in the Middle East that help lay claim to the Bible and and how real it is. And so like hearing the specific numbers, and I think for me, when you hear the specific numbers, last week we had talked about on the podcast about just how Moses was being prepared to lead an army and to lead a nation. Like that's wild in a sense. And we think, army, nation. No, it was millions of people that he was getting ready to lead. Matter of fact, he was leading in this moment. Like God set him over millions of people, a vast nation. And that's like, I just think about just living in Waterloo, Iowa, and how many people live here, and he was leading more than that. And it's like I can barely lead me and my wife sometimes.
He was leading more than the Cedar Valley. In fact, he had more than just men. Than the entire Cedar Valley. That's
wild.
6 times as much. So
that's wild.
So the book of Numbers, it's significant for a multitude of reasons. I mean, outside of the census, we start to see, to your point, that Moses is no longer leading a group of slaves. He's preparing a nation. And we'll see it on the back half of the book more so than anywhere, but after they kind of get to the promised land and everything, we start to see them take on wars and specifically with the Moabites and the Canaanites, and we start to see this army, this nation, start to fully develop. I think one of the things that really stuck out to me as we were reading through the book of Numbers is there was a setup. God had. I said it this way on Sunday. God is a God of power, but he's also a God of order. So for those of you who are Enneagram 1s out there, you guys are feeling really good. You're like, there is an order to things, and my wife included. And so, but yeah, there's an order to things. And so I loved just looking through this, like how he set up the camp specifically. We see in chapter 2, he starts to take the census. He's starting to get all the numbers put together. But in chapter 3 of the book of Numbers, he really starts to hit on this idea that the Levites play a special role. And we know that the Levites, they're the ones who won't inherit anything. They will just inherit God. Right? And so he sets them closest to him. So he sets the tabernacle in the middle, and he sets the Levites around them, and then he sets all of the other 11 tribes around that. And they're traveling in this kind of, what's the word for it?
Formation.
This formation, really. And there's strength in that. And God finds it... how do I say that? God is how do I want to say that? He is intentional about where he places people. He's intentional about where he places people.
That's good.
And so we see like Moses and Aaron, they're very close to the tabernacle. We have like I'm gonna slaughter these names. Merari, Kohath and Gershon, they're all right there, and they're all from the tribe of Levi, and they're surrounding the tabernacle. And then you have the other tribes. You got Benjamin, Ephraim, Manasseh, Asher, Dan. You just go through the list, and it's really interesting to me to see it set up. One of the resources that I would suggest, if you haven't yet, check out the Bible Project. They have an amazing just kind of recap of each and every book of the Bible. And one of the things they pointed out is that like the way it was laid out would be almost set up like a cross. It's almost foreshadowing like, hey, God is always at the center, but there's always someday there will be a Jesus. And so there's this foreshadowing that is set up. But so it's just super interesting to me. Tell me some things, you guys, early on. Like I said, God is a God of power. He's a God of order. But when you're thinking through that, like the tabernacle and this God being at the center of everything, what kind of sticks out to you? What things are you like, man, I really want to hit that?
I mean, I think for me, just with the tabernacle, God being at the center and He intentionally placing, everybody in their respective spots.
Right.
I think something that stands out to me is that like God will come first.
Mm-hmm.
Like God has to be at the center of whatever is happening, or else it won't thrive.
Yep.
Right. So like He intentionally placed the Levites around Him. He wanted to be near. He wanted them to be near, and He wanted to be near them. He intentionally placed them in a formation of a cross. Like that's not just by happenstance.
Yep.
And I always even back to Genesis, and we're going through other books of the Bible. We're seeing how God relates Himself, or how God foreshadows Jesus to come.
Yep.
By the things that He does and the lessons, or this. And then I think for me, real quick, just Numbers. something that stuck out to me though with Numbers is that it seemed, starting off, I guess before the 10th chapter, I would say 1 through 9.
Yeah.
There was a lot of order.
A lot of order.
Like God was laying down a lot of order. Like He was letting people know, this is what you do. This is what I need from you. This is how I want you to be. Like He's I say that
down to furniture.
All the way down to furniture. Like He's so like to the smallest things. God is letting them know, this is how I want you to operate as a nation, and this is what you need to do to be blessed, and this is what you need to do. And I think something that stood out to me on the side B of that is the rebellious spirit of all those people. Like you still don't get it. God is showing you His, like he got you out of Egypt, out of slavery, out of all this, and you're still rebellious. Like I sat back and I was like laughing while I was reading over this book again, because I'm like, how stupid can y'all be? Like God is telling y'all time and time again, like I'm the one that brought you out, and you still don't want to listen. You still want to go back to that place because you don't have your answers now, and because you're impatient, and you're just like it just baffles me how this book is just. It starts off with so much order. God is taking care of them, and they still don't listen.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's very interesting too. We see it's in Numbers chapter 10. I mentioned this on Sunday, but it kind of throws me off because they're seeing God as a cloud by day, and fire by night. Like He is showing them miracles.
Wild.
Every time He moves.
Wild.
I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. There's like a imagery that's on, I'm sure it's on TikTok and Instagram and all that stuff. But like we always imagine it like a cloud, but it's like a tornado. This is a big cloud to be able to lift off the tabernacle and lead these people. Like this is not just like a small cloud. Like this is a serious deal.
Yeah.
And so it's super interesting to me that God would show Himself in that way, and they would still struggle. And then we find ourselves after chapter 10. He sets up the move, and we go right into Numbers 11, and immediately they start
complaining right away.
Immediately they start complaining
right away.
But isn't that just like us?
Right,
dude.
I mean, that is the human condition, isn't it? Like,
it is.
I mean, you think about like no matter how many times God has come through in our own lives.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Like, you would think that, okay, you got me through that thing that I prayed to you about.
Yeah.
And all right, so like from now on, like I know like this. Yeah. But then like some other distraction comes and some other thing, and then we're off again, and you know, it's like we look at them and we're like, man, those guys are stupid, but then like it's like look in the mirror and we're like, man, I'm kind of stupid also.
I can remember legitimately. Like just to give a practical and just like real life. I remember my daughter was born, and we thought she was going to be completely deaf, and a lot of people have either heard me share that story in the church or maybe this is your first time, but when Iris was born, she failed all the hearing tests.
Wow.
And it wasn't until about 3 months in, we're in Iowa City, they're talking to us, and they put the test on her, and I remember praying to God, like, we need a miracle, Lord. I'm thinking, one of the hardest things in my life will be that I'll walk my daughter down the aisle, and she won't hear me say, when the pastor says, who gives this woman to this man, I would say, her mother and I do. But she wouldn't hear that. And I remember that being like a hard thing in my head. I remember praying to God for a miracle, and this is how short-sighted I was. We found out, the doctor looks up and she goes, oh, she has 100% hearing in her right ear. And I remember looking at my wife, listen to this, bro, and I go, that's amazing. She's going to be able to hear it out of one ear.
Wow.
So I started praising God
Yeah.
for half of the miracle.
Yeah.
I had already forgotten about there's a whole other half of this.
Yeah.
Her other ear.
Crazy.
And then of course, you know, the Lord humbles you and they say she has 100% hearing in her left ear too. And I remember being like just overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But how quickly, like I was just like, I'm just thankful for the 1 year. You know, like I had gotten short-sighted, and it's the human condition. That's a great way to put it. What I love about my Bible here, I have a study Bible, and so it's an NIV study Bible, and it's been super helpful for me. But they list out, they have 7 times that Israel complains over the course of 10 chapters, and it says they complained about hardship, they complained about a lack of meat, they were hungry. It says they complained about being stuck in the wilderness. They got themselves put there, but why not complain about it? It says they complained about Moses and Aaron's authority, which we'll see in a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about that, because God shows some, for lack of a better term, wrath.
Oh yeah.
And then they complained about Moses and Aaron and again, and then that is what ends up causing that wrath. And then verse 20 or chapter 20, they complain about a lack of water, as if God didn't just give them food for, you know, they don't know that their lives in chapters. But and then in 21, it says that they complained that God and Moses brought them into the wilderness to die, which God was very clear. Hey, you will wander in the wilderness, but the next generation will see the promised land. And so just thinking through some of that stuff, we see kind of this kind of tipping point in chapter 13. God and Moses are talking, and God tells Moses to have them go into the promised land. He wants them to scope it out, and it's a land flowing with milk and honey, is what it says. And they come back, and I just want to read this verse because I felt like it was significant, but it says, we went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. And this is Numbers 13:27, by the way. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. Right away, they throw in the, hey, this is actually kind of scary. We don't know if we want to do this. In fact, so much so, in verse 31 it says, but the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are. So talk to me a little bit about that. You know, we've seen the tabernacle. We see the presence of God lifted off of the tabernacle. This is a powerful God, and they're worried about some people. They're worried about some people that might overthrow them in the land of Canaan. Give me some angle. What do you all think about that? What do you
I think something that kind of resonates with me while you read that is, at least for me, I'll speak on my perspective. I fall victim a lot of times from not following God's voice and being subject to what's right in front of me instead of hearing God say move and then just stepping out on faith. So like there are many times where God will say, you know, hey Trevor, I need you to fall back in this instance, but then the thing that I want is right in front of me. So I'm like, oh, I want that. Or God is saying, hey, this thing that I have for you is right here, and I'm like, well, no, I can't do that yet. I can't step into that role yet. I can't step into that calling yet. I can't step into that season yet. I'm not ready. I'm scared. Oh, people are going to talk about me. People are going to do this. Whatever. Like that. I fall victim to that. Just being very transparent. I have fallen victim to that a lot, where I've thought about others instead of listening to God's voice and Him, you know, ascending me in a certain way or taking me to another place because I was too worried about who was out there. I was worried about either being alone or being around too many people that that may know more than me or may would look at me in a certain way. So that kind of resonates with me. It's just the fact that they went out to scope and they see a land that's flowing with milk and honey. But then immediately they're like, hey, we can't take that. We can't do that. Like we can't go there. Like I'm not. I see it looks great, but I ain't going. I ain't gonna be the first one. You know what I mean? Like that's something that I think caught my eye with that.
I think for me, you know, like that's a great point. I think for me, you know, and again, we all have experiences with this, I think, but as I read this story, I'm just kind of reminded of
Mm-hmm.
like times in my life where, I think it's really for me, it's like a test of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. It's like when the rubber hits the road.
Yes.
Like, what do you really believe?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because you can say all the right things. You can make all the proclamations about how you trust God.
Yep.
How you trust Him, that He's gonna do whatever. But like when the rubber hits the road, like what is your response to that? When when you don't have enough money at the end of the month, like
right.
what's your response? When your relationships aren't going right, like what's your response? Are you gonna have faith in God that He's gonna take you through that, or are you, is it just showing the faith that you have?
Yeah.
And that we're just not quite there yet. And
so good.
I think it's always this is telling, right?
Yeah.
For them and for us.
Yeah.
That even though God has taken us through all this stuff, we still lack the faith.
Yes.
To truly trust Him in all areas of our life.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting. I skipped this verse, but we actually do have a person in this story who does have that faith, and it's Caleb. And it says in verse 30, then Caleb silenced the people before Moses, and he said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. Now, he is probably in... Now, listen, how do I say that? You've been in situations in your life where you're looking at something that is for sure bigger than you.
Oh, for sure.
But God's called you to it.
Mm-hmm.
I can even say in my own life, like being a pastor, I just had a conversation with you the other day. Like, this has to be a calling.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be a calling. So if God is calling me to it, I'm going to do it, right? So my first point from Sunday was, if God sends us, we go.
Yeah.
We go. It doesn't matter. Like, we just need to go. And really, they experience what it's like when you don't go. That's where we find them wandering in the wilderness. And so
let's start. I want to pause real quick.
Yeah.
I know on an earlier episode, I can't think if it was the first one or the last one, but we had talked about the Nephilim.
Yeah.
And they were here before the flood, after the flood, and descendants of the Nephilim. And if you read down further in that scripture, they're talking about how they saw descendants of Nephilim.
Yeah.
There. So just for context, like if I were to go look at a land, and I'm seeing some Nephilim, like giants, and like I might be a little bit taken back to, what I mean, like from a humanistic perspective, like I like not saying that not saying that they, not saying that that's the right attitude to have, but just saying in a realistic perspective. If I'm looking over a land and I see all the things I see, and then out of my right eye I see a Nephilim come, or a descendant of a giant, just right there, I'm like, I ain't really trying to square up with no giant. I don't care if God gave me weapons and swords, all that stuff. I don't care I ain't trying to square up with no giant.
Coincidentally, most men won't throughout Scripture until we get to King David. So
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, one of the things that I just kind of saw as I was reading this passage, in verse 33. It's it ends by saying, these guys are saying, we seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them, so that they saw us like that as well.
Interesting.
And for me, I'm just like, man, it really all depends on the perspective that you're looking at.
Oh, sure.
Right. Yeah. Like if you see yourself a certain way, they see yourself a certain way, but like ask yourself, what does God see?
Exactly.
Right, that they're not taking that into consideration.
That's so
you know what I
good.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
That's so good.
It's like my perspective is this, their perspective is this. Okay, but what does God see in this situation?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I think it even reminds me, and not that Jesus needed this. How do I even say that? So Jesus is 30 years old when he gets baptized.
Mm-hmm.
And then his ministry starts because God makes a declaration over him. He said, "This is my son, with whom I'm well pleased." His identity gets secured, and then he starts his ministry. Mm-hmm. And so if they could walk in their identity, they would know, we don't even have to worry about the Nephilim. Right. This land is already ours because he's declared it.
Yeah.
So you get to walk differently. I love the way Pastor Q's daughter Kaylee says it. She says, you walk in the world different when you know that you're loved.
Yeah.
I would add to that, you walk in the world different when you know your identity.
Mm-hmm.
So if they would know their identity here, this is a spy mission, but really this is just a preview of what they're going to get to enjoy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But not these guys.
Not them.
Not these guys.
Not them.
Because they come back out and they start complaining again.
Yeah.
They start
I
complaining.
think you're about to go talk about Caleb.
Yeah.
So
Caleb sets it up. He says, "Hey, I think we should do it." God basically says in verse 24, he says, "But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly."
Yeah.
I think that there's something there too. I think that people who follow God wholeheartedly have a different spirit.
Yes.
You guys have been around people who are like that. You know, I think of Pastor Q. Like, one thing I never have to doubt about our pastor is how much he loves the Lord.
Sure. Yeah.
Him and Pastor Angela both, there is an intimacy and a desire to know God fully. And they know, and we know, we'll never know God fully, but we can know him accurately.
Yes.
And so Scripture gives us insights into God and his character, and I love that about our pastors. But Caleb loves God so much and trusts him so much. He remembers what happened in Egypt. He remembers how God brought them out. And because of that, he's able to go into it confidently. He knows his identity.
But to even take that, into another place, out of all those people, he stood out. Yeah. Like, there's millions of people that got, God said, like, you won't inhabit this land. Like, your children will, your grandchildren will. Like I'm gonna have to kill y'all. I'm gonna have to wait till y'all die.
There's 2.5 million of you, and I only got Caleb.
Like, I got Caleb, and that's it. But like you have to wait until all those people die in 40 years of waiting and them dying off, and then Caleb is the only one that sprouts out of that. And it's something that I think that I would like to point out is that God is loving, but he's also just. And he has to, like, God will have justice. And that doesn't always feel good to us. Right? Like, again, if I'm a crook and I steal something and the judge gives me whatever time, I can't look at the judge and say, why? Like, no, I have to, justice has to be served in some type of way. So there's going to be a sentence. And with this, how the people have still not put their trust in God, still rebelled against God, complained about where God was taking them and how long it was taking, not being fed, not whatever. Even in going back to, I want to say either chapter 10 or 11, when God sent the quail and was like, all right, y'all complaining, great. Here's an influx of quail. Y'all gonna eat till y'all get tired and sick and everything,
and then I'm gonna send a plague.
And then I'm gonna send a plague. Crazy, like, y'all, I gave y'all what y'all wanted. And then now we got to, and I forget what it is. Q's gonna get me for this one, but I forget what they named it. But it was a place the place where they were buried because of their craving.
Sure. And
there's a name for it. I have to look it up. But like, it's just to show that God, he's loving, but he's also just. So the fact that he found Caleb,
he is
good in his sight, and allowed him to now inhabit that land with the with the generation that was coming. That's awesome. Like, he had to feel great, but also you got to feel a little weird that you see 2.5 million or however many people are not there. You're the only one besides a few think other whatever, but just to have that favor, with God, and because you love God that much and you trust God that much, that, like, man, that's a Caleb moment.
Cool. Yeah.
So cool.
I mean, one of the things, so, like, also along with Caleb was Joshua, right?
Yes.
That was the other guy who said, hey, let's take this land.
And
I'm just reminded of, Joshua, kind of serving in the tent of meeting with Moses.
Yes.
And there's that one verse that says that, even when everyone else left the tent, Joshua, son of Nun, like, stayed there.
He stayed.
And I'm just thinking, like, it was those kind of experiences that kind of led him to have the kind of faith that he had, because he was in the space that the Spirit of God filled. And he breathed in the glory and the majesty of God, and he knew what it was like to experience God, and so that carried over into this experience where he's like, man, I already know that if God is with us, like who's going to be against us? Let's take the land, So I think it's so important that your past history, defines, like, what your response will be.
Mhm.
You know, when these types of things happen to you in your future. So.
For sure.
Yeah.
That's
And,
good.
and Moses and Aaron are going to make some mistakes later on in the book, and we're going to see that they're not going to get into the promised land either. But before they do that, there's a group of leaders. I just always think this story is so interesting. It's Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan, I made this mention. It's such a cool name. It's Nathan with a D. Like, how dope. So Korah, Dathan, and Abiram, and they decide, hey, we don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
We want to go back to Egypt. We're gonna overthrow you, and they get a group of 250 guys to follow them, 250 men, and Moses can't save them this time. It's so interesting. You know, God has sent plagues. He's done some punishment up to this point, but Moses kind of lifts his hands. He's like, hey, nope, not on this one.
Mm-hmm.
And so God tells them to stand out in front of their whatever their houses would be, and he punishes them. And we see God in a new light. We see him kind of like, hey, they're done. Talk to me about that. How does that make y'all feel when you're thinking through? Because God is a God of justice, but he's also a God of love, and he's a God of kindness.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, I'm thinking of new believers. I'm thinking of people who might be listening to this. Like, how do you reconcile that in your lives? Like, when you hear God performing this justice, like, this is the earth swallows them up.
Yeah,
Takes all their families. Like, you know, for me, I remember the first time I ever read it, just as a young believer, I was like, their families too, like, they do that, you know.
Yeah.
What I mean? Like,
Yeah.
But yeah, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think early on, as a new Christian, it didn't sit well with me.
Sure.
Right? Just because, like, if I look at justice being served to a nation, well, I got to think to myself, is it all of them, or is it not? Is it a few that mess it up for everybody? And if the few that didn't, you know, participate in whatever ungodly things that were happening, what is their judgment at the end? You know, and as a new Christian, I think that's something that's kind of hard to wrestle with, because I don't want to be caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time, right? Like, because of somebody else's mistakes. Like, that's hard to deal with.
The people you surround yourself matters.
The people that I surround myself matters.
Yep.
So that's why you have to build a
Calebs.
good community. A good Caleb, a good Moses.
Good Joshua.
Moses to a certain extent, though, because Moses is hard headed.
And we're gonna see that here.
Moses is real hard headed. But yeah. So I mean, I think that's how it relates to me a little bit. But
yeah. What are some thoughts that go through your head, David?
Yeah, I think for me, I think it is kind of like it's a fallacy to think, you know, when we have, oh, that's so unfair.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
Well, actually, what is unfair is that we get to live.
Yeah.
You know, like the fact that we're all sinners in God's eyes, right? Like that we have another day, you know, God willing, tomorrow to live our lives.
Yes.
Like we already are the recipients of so much grace.
That's a miracle right there.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And so for us to cry, oh, that's not fair. No, like it's not fair for us to be around.
Yes.
But it is God's grace and God's mercy that allows us to be around.
Yep.
You know, and I just you know, like the narrative is, man, the Old Testament God was this wrathful, whatever, mean, terrible kind. God. But yeah, you see, okay, these guys are like messing up constantly.
Yeah.
And God is still like,
Yes.
no, you're my people.
Yeah.
I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to fulfill my end of the bargain
Yeah.
of the covenant that I made with you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's like,
And
man,
he didn't need to.
Right, he didn't need to because they already broke it.
Yep.
But he is continuing to be faithful, and so for me, no, that's not the narrative I see at all. The narrative I see is just a merciful God that is constantly
so good.
pouring out forgiveness, pouring out mercy that is undeserved. And so for me, all of us, those, like, everyone's a sinner.
Yeah.
You know, so those guys messed up, like, wrong place, wrong time.
Right.
But like everyone, really, that's what we deserve.
Right.
And so for the fact that he is preserving the majority of the nation of Israel, like that to me is mercy.
It's so good. Yeah, and so what we end up seeing later on is Aaron is selected as high priest. We talked a little bit about that on Sunday. He puts his staff in there. It buds. It's got almonds coming off of it. And then we see literally like not even a couple chapters later, Moses and Aaron, they're getting ready to make sure that the people can get a drink of water, and the livestock are also going to get some water. And God says, "Speak to the rock." And I don't know what this boy Moses was doing, but he grabbed that staff and he struck the rock twice. And I joked about it, and I really, unless there's something in Scripture that I'm missing, I think he had to strike it twice, because the first time it's like, that ain't what I said to do. But I think about that in my own life, even. Where God has said, hey, I want you to do this, and I've done something else instead. Yeah. That's kind of like it. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, hey, a great example is, I remember the Lord specifically calling me to be a pastor. And I know that that's a call in my life. And then I became a worship leader. Yeah. I was like, well, it's kind of the same thing. Well, yeah, I mean, there's ways to pastor people while being a worship leader. Yeah. But that wasn't my calling, right? Now, the Lord still used all that stuff, and I think that there are things that go on in our lives that the Lord is going to use for His glory.
I think when it comes to Moses striking the rock, I think so. A life lesson that something that stood out to me with Moses specifically is that he allowed the frustrations and he allowed the sorrow that he might have felt, the anger that he might have felt, to deter him from God's plan. Yep. Right? Like, you got to think about Moses has seen them create idol worship, and he's seen them try to rebel against God. He's seen them throw parties of just like crazy wild stuff. I don't know what the age range of. There we go. He said it. I don't know. I don't know what the age range is. So orgies in a sense, or sex parties,
if
all
that
stuff.
Watching this, let your parents
ask your parents about or whatever. Sorry, but you have to think that like Moses has seen all these people, not like a small group of people. Yeah. A nation just go crazy time after time after time. Yep. And so like I see why he's frustrated, but he allowed that frustration to cloud his judgment and to cloud his reasoning and not hear God's voice. Yeah. And I think that happens a lot with us, where God is telling us which way to go, what to do, clear instructions, and because of frustrations that happen to us daily, we allow ourselves to go off the narrow path. Yeah. And again, and then you see that, well, Moses did not listen to God when he said, I need you to speak to the rock. Instead, he strikes it. So then now Moses is basically, he can't go to the promised land. Yep. But a part of me feels like the reason why he, now granted, he wasn't disobedient like everybody else. Right. But a part of me feels like
he actually really obedient up to this point.
He was really obedient. Yep. But I think we had talked about this a few Sundays ago, is that there's a higher standard. Yep. To priests, to leadership. Yep. So the punishment is severe because of your accountability.
Yep. You're held accountable. Yeah. And I would just say too, because I want to make sure we can wrap this up. Yeah. And we're running super low on time, so I just want to kind of bring this all together. I think Moses and Aaron making the decisions they made, it led to Aaron eventually dying. And Eleazar, his son, takes over. He now wears the garments of the high priest. He's going to be their new high priest. Yeah. And we see Moses continues to lead the people. I think if anything, for me, what it tells me about Moses is he saw his mistake and he still finished the race that God had laid before him.
That's good.
And so we see in kind of the last section of all of this, we get a second census. God is still passionate about his people. He's still going to fulfill his promises. And so he has a recount, basically, and it's going to be this new generation is going to be the ones that enter the promised land. And we'll find out in Deuteronomy, a little spoiler, that's not going to happen next book. They're not going to reach the promised land. But they are going to get closer, and God is going to fulfill his promise. And kind of my last point Sunday was when God promises us, he keeps it.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to wrap this up here, guys, but I just want you to know that today, that if you're listening in and you're thinking, hey, I don't know why God does the things he does, but I know he promises me and I know he has a plan for my life, I want to encourage you. That is true. We're so thankful that you stopped in and that you listened to the Binge the Bible podcast. Come back next week for our Deuteronomy episode. Pastor Q will be back and it's going to be absolutely amazing. We love you guys. Bless you. Have a great rest of your week.